Our friend Jill Johnson-Young is back with us today to talk about intimacy during a serious illness. You're connected with the Heart of Hospice. I'm Helen Bauer, here with Jerry Fenter.
Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, we're here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at GrandPad. Do you have an older family member who's isolated, or do you feel disconnected from a senior loved one who lives at a distance? The folks at GrandPad have come up with the perfect solution, an easy-to-use device that connects older adults with family and friends using video chat, email, photo sharing, and more. Visit grandpad.net for details.
Okay, so this is where we put the disclaimer on. Today's topic is the sex talk.
Okay, just letting everybody know ahead of time that this is what we're going to talk about. This is the sex talk. So the two topics that people don't want to talk about in public are death and sex.
I'm thinking they don't even want to talk about that in private and with their family members.
I think you're probably
Definitely.
right.
But our friend Jill Johnson-Young is fearless. We are so blessed. Jill holds a BA from the University of California and also has a master's in social work from the University of South Florida. She is a licensed LCSW in California. She is the CEO of Central Counseling Services. She serves as a clinical therapist as well as a certified grief recovery facilitator.
Jill has worked with numerous hospice patients. In fact, she was a hospice social worker for a time. She herself has been widowed twice and is the author of a fabulous book called The Rebellious Widow, a practical guide to love and life.
She's got some unique perspective based on her work experience and her life experience. She's wonderful. She's been on the show with us before, but today we're talking about something we've never talked about on the podcast before. And I got to tell you that the initial thought in my head was, this makes me uncomfortable and I don't want to have this conversation.
Right. So you, as our listener, get the privilege of hearing this conversation in private. So we had to have this conversation together
in a
with
group
Jill.
setting, yes, over Zoom.
But we hope that the information that Jill shares today will be very beneficial. And in fact, I found it beneficial. I found it very helpful in understanding the needs of the patient and the couple, and how important it is for us to help in these types of situations, in these types of circumstances. We can, we should, because otherwise we're completely forgetting and ignoring a very important part of this couple's life.
And I don't think you have to be a hospice or end-of-life professional to appreciate the content that Jill's going to be talking about, sexual intimacy with someone who's terminally ill and dying. You know, I think caregivers, if you're a caregiver for someone or you know of someone who is a caregiver for someone who's terminally ill, it's good information to know. There doesn't need to be shame or guilt or that loss of your identity at this point. You don't have to have that. It doesn't have to be that way. Your hospice team should help you. They can help you. It's okay to ask those questions. It's okay to have those feelings and those thoughts and those longings. And Jill's going to talk about all of that.
Right. So Jill brings a lot of humor to this conversation, but a lot of good information too. So please sit back and listen to our conversation with Jill Johnson-Young. Jill Johnson-Young, it is so good to have you back on our podcast again.
Thank you for having me. I love being on your show, and I love the work you guys do. I refer to you all the time.
Oh, well, thank you. We appreciate that. So this is the summertime now when we're recording this, and you have a garden, and you have told us about all the wonderful things you're getting out of your garden. Tell us more about that. What kind of vegetables are you growing?
We have all kinds of squash because I'm a squash person. And this is the first year we put in spaghetti squash. So we are watching them turn yellow. And when they get to just the right color, we go out and snatch them. But I also have cucumbers. I have a zillion tomatoes that are sort of taking over the place. We have cucumbers. We have lettuce. We have pumpkins for Halloween for the grandkids. We have watermelon. We have beans, tomatillos. The carrots are not doing well, but just about everything else is. So it's quite the little feast out there. I can go out and pick something and make it for dinner, which I love in the summertime.
Right.
Oh, that's
so,
nice.
Yeah. So you can make a whole meal out of what you grow in your garden.
Absolutely. We are eating lots of vegetarian, and even when we're not, we throw a little chicken in, and then it's spaghetti squash and Italian squash and some fresh tomato. And I have to fight Doug, our dog, for the tomatoes because Doug likes tomatoes.
He likes to eat tomatoes.
If I'm cutting tomatoes, he shows up and he gets about half.
Oh,
He's my tomato boy.
he deserves a treat.
Right. My mom lives next door and she's got fruit trees. So I have now frozen peaches. We've frozen strawberries. We've frozen plums. We've got oranges I need to juice. And I've got to go pick apples this afternoon. So
That's
it's
awesome.
like a little mini farm on 2 little house lots.
Very nice.
That's awesome.
Very
That is
nice.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're not talking about gardening today.
But we're talking about reproduction kind of stuff.
This is true. This is true.
Honeybees.
Okay, so the birds and the bees, yes.
That's it.
Oh,
I'm so getting off this podcast.
We're so keeping you here.
Oh, goodness. Jill, we wanted to talk to you about this. You have actually had presentations that you've done at different conferences and things about this subject. And so we kind of consider you a subject matter expert when it comes to this. How does a serious illness or a terminal prognosis for a person affect the need for intimacy? That's really the question we're looking at today.
You know, intimacy is such a big issue, especially when an intimate partner is dying, because not only is the person dying, but the couple is dying. And so when you think of it that way, and you really have to, because there's going to be only one survivor, not a couple, that couple needs to say goodbye intimately as well. And that survivor needs to have some of those body memories to carry with them. So when they wake up in the morning and their partner is no longer in that bed, they can recall the sensation of being up against them or being held by them and can remember the intimate moments. It's a different goodbye, and it's a separate and distinct kind of loss that's in addition to the loss of someone you love, and it's separate and distinct that nobody else has it. You know, when you lose somebody else, you lose the sensation of hugging them, but there isn't the expectation of sexual intimacy and being together and all the pieces that go together with that. And then when there's a survivor, what frequently happens is they're treated all of a sudden as if, especially the widows, they're suddenly the Blessed Virgin Mary. And we no longer talk about the fact that they were intimate with someone, you know, just a little bit before, and they've lost that whole piece of themselves. So when there is a loss coming, that couple needs to be able to feel like they can talk about this loss, and they need to feel supported in it, and they need to be given options in terms of ways to maintain intimacy up to and until the very end of life and at death. And they need to be included in the after death care immediately. Do they want to have that moment to bathe their partner's body by themselves, with maybe someone in the background to help them with the rolling and the moving, but because that's their partner that they have showered with and done, you know, that's their partner. So there's all kinds of layers of intimacy. And one of the things that all of the providers, whether it's mental health or hospice or physicians before they're on hospice, are terrible at is bringing this up and giving permission. And it's the one thing that the intimate partners wish everybody would, but they feel weird about bringing it up. Because like, oh my God, I'm thinking about sexual stuff and my loved one's dying and you're going to think I'm weird. And so it just cuts it all out and it becomes this big unspoken mess.
Right.
And it shouldn't be. It should be openly spoken about.
I think we sort of have this idea and expectation that, well, when the partner's sick, nobody's going to be thinking about sexual intimacy. They won't be doing anything like that.
We have a tendency to think that about people as they age anyway.
The average thought in the United States, and this includes hospice staff, I've done the research, we assume that people are no longer sexually active at 52.
At 52?
Let me just say I'm 58, and I disagree with that completely.
I knew it was coming. I knew there was going to be a comment. That's awesome. So let's talk about this. Anticipatory loss is what this is.
Yeah.
When you talk about loss of roles and loss of identity. So anticipatory grief for both the patient and the partner, that loss of the sexual identity, your sexual role, your sexual activity, isn't that just another piece of anticipatory grief? It's just another piece that you've had to peel away or drop away, or at least that's the assumption.
The assumption is you've now become a caregiver, and so you're no longer sexually intimate, and so we don't have to talk about it.
Right, and it's not
You are
appropriate
now
for
just
you
a
to
caregiver.
be sexual. Yes, it's not appropriate. Right. Celibacy for a widow is appropriate.
Right. Thou shalt not have sexual needs anymore.
Exactly.
Those are wiped out because there's a casket, so that's all over.
Right.
All of that is not true. And we know from research that one of the ways that lots of people cope with, especially right after a funeral and the weeks after, not the intimate partner loss, but the adult kids, they go home and they are very sexually active because it's part of reclaiming life.
Yes. Part of reconnecting with warmth and intimacy. Yes.
But the partner is now going home to an empty bed, and that's assumed to be okay. And the only people who talk about it with that partner are other people who've had those kinds of losses, which is hard to do.
So, what strikes me is one of the things we do, so as a nurse, right? One of the things that I've helped facilitate is when a patient needs to be put into a hospital bed, when a hospital bed becomes useful or actually becomes a complete necessity.
They're necessary.
Oh, yeah. Right. For repositioning, et cetera, so you can provide the care. And for
safety.
Absolutely. Because we can put a rail on it if needed. We can raise the bed up and down, and it's good for body mechanics for the caregivers. I think we forget the impact of pulling a partner out of a shared bed.
Let me tell you a story about that. And that's partly where this whole discussion and where I started doing this as part of speaking engagements is when my second wife was dying. Actually, when my first wife was dying, my second wife was her hospice nurse, right? And Casper was always one of those unusual creatures. And so she would encourage, like she came in one day and she said, Jill, you need to crawl into bed with Linda. Let me pull and this is in a single hospital bed. In the living room, I'm going to shift her over and we're going to take it down. I'm going to get you in, then I'm going to pull it up, and then I'm going to keep everyone out of the house. So you guys can at least hold each other or whatever. I want you guys to put that together and have that memory.
Right.
Not one other nurse suggested it, and I never saw a nurse suggest it before. And then I started suggesting it as the social worker and asking nurses to do it. But when Casper was in her hospital bed, I came home one day from work and I discovered that her hospital bed was now in bondage with our bed, and that they had tied the bed with zip ties together. So the feet of the hospital bed to the foot of our big bed, and there was a plastic thing in between so that she could switch over and come into our bed when it was okay, and we could put up the rail when she wasn't, because with Lewy body dementia, sometimes nighttime is dangerous because of the sleep disorder that can be really violent. And she told the nurses, there's going to come a time where we can't snuggle anymore and where I can't touch Jill anymore. And I need that until I can't do it anymore. You have to help me. So she facilitated that. They were taken aback.
Really?
They did it. They were completely on board. They thought it was a great idea. But it's not something that's typically suggested, and certainly no one suggested it to her. She's the one who had to ask.
Interesting.
In the haze of dementia, she had to ask. Right. And I think that's important to remember, that is important for the person who's dying. because when then they are in that hospital bed by themselves, they want to remember the sensation of holding their partner, and they want access. And I think that that's something that it's possible to do.
Right.
And we don't facilitate it enough.
So that brings up a question, I guess. How many hospice nurses or hospice professionals in general, not just the nurses,
right,
but hospice professionals in general, are facilitating those kinds of interactions for the patient and their intimate partner? And my assumption is, and this is just an assumption because I have no numbers or statistics, maybe you do, Jill.
I do.
But I'm assuming that probably doesn't happen very often.
I did a survey, and it was just a survey, but I had almost 200 participants, and it was international. And I found that not one hospice professional was willing to bring it up. And what they said was, I'm going to wait for the, if the family, if the patient and partner need it, they'll bring it up to me.
Right. And they're not going to.
And I did the same. Right. And I did the same with survivors and people currently on hospice. And they said, I would love to bring it up, but they're going to think I'm a weirdo.
Right.
Right. And especially the ones where dementia was involved, they're going to think that I'm abusive.
Oh, wow.
And I've heard that. I've heard discussions in IDTs before where it's like, well, she has dementia. Her husband shouldn't be in bed with her. That's her husband.
Right.
And chances are she's going to remember that more than she's going to remember, the name of the hospice nurse. She'll remember that sensation.
We know it's important. We do. I mean, on some level, as a nurse, I've always known this, right? This is part of our humanness.
It just feels weird.
Right. We're sexual beings. So maybe I could bring up the topic. But then when you open that can of worms, then you have to have that discussion. And I don't think I was ever comfortable with that. But I also had no training in it, never listened to a podcast. But I'm kind of struck. I pulled up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Do you remember the old pyramid?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Talks about what we need, and self-actualization, creativity, morality is at the very top. You would think that sexual intimacy was way up there with the very smallest of needs, and it is not.
Nope.
It comes right after safety of body and health, breathing, food, water, survival. Actually, sex is actually on the bottom.
It is.
Because if we don't have connection, we don't have any reason to be here. People need connection. That's why babies in big orphanages didn't do well, because they didn't have enough touching.
Right. Detachment disorders.
Right.
Interesting.
So we have to have those we have to facilitate attachment, and we have to acknowledge this couple became a couple, right? If they're married or they're not, they wanted to say the vows, they wanted to do whatever. They have been a couple, undeniably. And so that piece of them is still there. One of the things that I would say to my couples is, tell me who made the first move. And, you do it with a laugh. What attracted you to each other, right? Who was the better kisser? Right? That gets those discussions going immediately, because you're already discussing intimacy, but you're doing it with a smile on your face and in a less kind of a interviewee style. Let's just talk about how you two got to be you two.
Right. It's a little more casual. And I think, even so let's take it a step further if it's beyond a traditional couple, polyamorous relationships, things like that. Those conversations can still take place.
They should.
We just need to be more adept at how we do it. So I want to touch back on something. You were talking about dementias and Alzheimer's, and those caregivers are placed in, I would say, unique caregiving relationships when it comes to intimacy, because emotional and mental connections begin to sever prior to, typically, the physical connections, physical abilities. So I have heard, and I have had personal experience with friends of relationships that develop outside that partnership for the healthy partner. How common do you think that is? And what are the effects? How socially acceptable is that? How do people look at that?
It happens more often when someone has had to place their partner. And the pattern that I've seen more often is that then the partner who's placed forgets that they were married, and they start having little romances in the facility, Romances are very common in congregate living facilities, which tends to be very upsetting for the placing partner and even more upsetting for the adult kids.
Right.
Because they don't understand it and they don't understand dementia. And so sometimes that gets ugly and the family starts trying to bust those up. I'm not sure why it's giving someone happiness in a facility, but they do. But for the placing partner, the one left at home who doesn't have dementia, it's not at all uncommon to at least reach out for more companionship. And sometimes that companionship also develops into a full-on relationship. And those tend to be very, very secretive because of judgmental thought process about it.
Yeah.
The way I approach it is, if that is what you need, then that is what you need. You are the only one dealing with this illness and with your spouse. And if that is something that you can come to terms with, then I will be supportive. If you're having trouble with it, then I'll support you in whatever you need to do to be okay right now. But it's not that uncommon. There just aren't a lot of numbers because nobody's going to admit to it because they get jumped on.
Well, do you think there's a stigma or an association with that type of relationship outside the partnership that the healthy partner is somehow abandoning or neglecting?
Absolutely.
Even though there's no compromise on the caregiving situation. But somehow that's what it represents.
It represents that you don't love them anymore. You're not carrying their relationship anymore. And in fact, what they are doing is grieving. But they are grieving with someone who can help them with the grief because their partner is no longer available to them. It depends on the kind of dementia. There are some dementias where the memory of the partner remains active until the very end. So my late wife had Lewy bodies. She knew who I was up to the day she died. Frontotemporal, the same. Some of the others, but Alzheimer's and some of the other ones, your brain is so diminished that you are not verbal and you don't know who anybody is anymore. And so it really depends on the kind of dementia and the trajectory of it. And if someone has early onset dementia, then they have a very fast trajectory of the disease, no matter which one it is. And then you've got a young survivor as well, who's trying to cope with how all of this works and all of the demands of life when they're under 65 and their partner is dying of dementia. And for them, sometimes reaching out for a relationship is a life hold. It keeps them grounded.
This may be a stretch, but I would go so far as to say a form of self-care.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because sexual activity, it changes the way our brain is thinking. It gives us all the rush of good hormones and it brings relief. And sometimes that's what's needed for someone who's coping with, working and taking care of someone who's in a facility or having someone at home with a caregiver and having other demands and financial demands. Because when someone is young with dementia, you're not financially ready for this. It's not retirement time.
Right.
There's it's a pressure cooker. That's why we lose caregivers, because they die from the pressure cooker.
Absolutely.
So if it gives them a chance to survive and thrive afterward, I'm not going to tell them not to. I'm not going to encourage someone. I'm going to say whatever you need is what I'm going to support you in doing.
Right.
And I don't think a lot of people are in a position where they feel like they can say that. It's, well, you're still married. They're still here. They're still here, but they don't know who you are. They're bedbound.
I would think that would be especially challenging for adult kids, the adult children in the family, to look at that healthy partner and see that happening as a pulling away. It's anticipatory grief. It's just another indicator, another reminder that the terminally ill or seriously ill partner is not gone yet, but you're acting as if they are.
It's a really big bump for them, which is why most of these stay secret. But it's also hard because typically the adult kids are not in the home. We're not part of having to come to terms with placement. Yes, they had to probably agree to it, but they were in their own homes and they're having their own lives and they're busy with their kids or their life or their travels or the things they do. This is not their partner. It's a parent. And so they're not doing anticipatory grief to the degree that the partner is.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the ethical dilemmas that's also a part of this discussion is when you have a partner with Alzheimer's and they have a typical disease trajectory with their Alzheimer's. When does the healthy partner stop having intimacy with that partner? In other words, when can the partner with Alzheimer's say no or say yes? I mean, there's just this ethical dilemma. I mean, I've even heard of at least one, probably it's happened more often than that, where a husband was actually charged with a crime because he had sex with his wife who had Alzheimer's.
Who I'm assuming could not give consent, so it's considered rape.
Right.
It happens in facilities when someone is witnessing.
Okay. So obviously that's a part of this discussion as well that we need to talk about. So how often do you feel like something like that happens? And what's a healthy partner to do in a situation like that?
I think first off, we need to be really careful with healthy partners having discussions with their ill partner and having it witnessed about what boundaries that ill partner wants to have when they become debilitated. Right? Is that something? Do they want their partner to continue to come in and share their bed? Do they want them to still hold them in an intimate way, even if it's just holding? Is that something they want for comfort? And if not, that needs to go in an advance directive. And that's a hard discussion to have, but it needs to go in the advance directive when the first diagnosis happens, when they're still capable of verbalizing.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
That's interesting. Yes. I'm like you. I had never considered that to be a part of an advanced
care planning. Wow.
It should be. And that's why we need diagnoses of dementia. 50% of doctors don't tell their patients they have dementia. Don't tell the family. They just don't say it.
And the rest of them they're not comfortable or not trained to have advanced care planning conversations. And
right.
Much less talk about their patient's sex life.
Right. And it needs to be in there.
That is very interesting.
Right. Because with cancer, you have a voice until you're, very, very end. Right. Or you're comatose. But with dementia, the abilities decline depending on the kind of dementia.
Wow.
So it needs to go in the advanced directives. It needs to be in that very first discussion when hospice arrives, if the person is still able to have those discussions, if it's not one of those where they refer at the very, 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 very end. Like happens so often.
Oh, it does.
We need to talk about it. And that's something that if any family has any history of dementia, that should be a discussion in the couples. All right. I know that I have the genes for late onset Alzheimer's. I know that that's a gift from my family. I've seen it on my genetic profile. We have these discussions. I've also picked out the walker I want. It's going to be powder coated blue and it's going to have a wine rack on it because we're going to be, I'm going to make trouble to the very end. Right. And Stacy is now like, you've seen those dog toys where it can say yes, no, out, in. We'll just put some of those on there, kiss, snuggle. We'll just make our own and you can press your button.
I love it. I love it. But I'm really, that's a huge mind shift for me. I'm a little ashamed of myself, I have to say. 12 years as a hospice nurse.
It's not. When I've done discussions like this at conferences, I've had hospice staff come up and say, I need to now apologize to every single person I've ever dealt with. No, it's just because it's not part of our society. Right?
Today's episode is sponsored by the team at GrandPad. They recognize that older people can be intimidated by technology. GrandPad is created to be easy to set up and effortless to use. The device allows for email, games, music, and photo and video sharing. The video chat feature came in so handy when my family couldn't visit my mom during the pandemic. She loved seeing photos of her grandkids and great-granddaughter. My brother acts as administrator for my mom's GrandPad. When he has a question, GrandPad customer service is quick and easy to understand. My brother was even able to give my mom instructions that she could follow over the phone. GrandPad comes with 4G LTE cellular service already included, so there's no need for Wi-Fi. Creating a family network is as simple as sending an email. When I got the email, I just downloaded the app and signed in. As part of her private network, I can share my photos and see what other members of the network are sharing. At 88 years old, my mom sent her first email. She was so proud of herself and excited to learn to manage technology. GrandPad keeps my mom connected with our family and can keep you connected to your family too. You can find more details at grandpad.net. Now back to today's episode.
Here's what I want to ask you then. When you're teaching hospice professionals about this subject, what are some of the things that you teach them? Do you teach them how to approach the couple about this? Go into some detail with us. How do you teach hospice professionals to talk about this subject?
I tend to open with the discussion about the bed being involved in BDSM because that breaks the ice. And so if I can say bondage in front of a group of staff and describe beds being in bondage, then we can laugh and then we can get on with it. I also tend to open with some funny music. And I do a lot of humor, which I do anyway when I speak, but there's a lot of this. You got to use humor to do this because otherwise it gets too crazy and it gets too weird. And then I talk about the thing of how do you ask someone about how they met and what was it like? And when you have children, was it scary when she first got pregnant? Did you guys get afraid of having sex at that point? That's a great place to talk because having someone terminally ill is very much the same. It's, I don't know what to do. We've never done this before, right?
Right.
It's not, I'm going to break your uterus, but it is, what do we do? I talk about talking to the couple about, do you want us to knock on the door if the door is shut, so that if it's a facility, so that we can give you the same privileges that you would give to a married couple in their own home if someone's had to be placed rather than just busting in, right? It's those sorts of things. How do we break open the discussion and how do we do it with a sense of humor? And then I discuss things like, they've been married or they've been a couple or they've been a tri or they've been whatever their relationship is. They've done this before we got here. They're doing this while we're not in the house or not in the facility. So let's figure out how we bring it into our care plan so that we can acknowledge it. When we say we're going to bring in the hospital bed and we say, what room do you want it in? Let's add, do you want to be able to have it next to your own bed so that we can shove them together so you guys can continue to be intimate together? That will be eyes wide open for that couple, and it will tell them you have given them permission to bring it up.
I got to tell you that brings tears to my eyes because I think I have separated so many older couples when the patient needed to be placed in a hospital bed and we could not figure out space in a bedroom. And so the patient basically is put on display in a common living area of the house.
And sometimes that is. Sometimes the bed doesn't fit. We removed furniture in our house. But one of the things I discuss with families when I'm talking about a hospital bed, if it's in the living room, is, okay, let's find some tall furniture or find a way to raise the height of the couch so that it can be equivalent to the bed. And then let's make it stable, but let's make that access, right? I do that anyway with chairs because if someone's sitting by a bed and they're in a chair and they're low, they're going to wreck their elbow trying to keep their arm in the bed, right? So body mechanics, it's part of body mechanics is what it is. And if the couple needs assistance with any of that, then I say, we can bring in a PT or an OT for a one-time consult on how to help you guys maintaining this relationship together while someone is in a bed. We can have someone help you with learning how to do the turning so that you guys can position yourselves in a way that maintains whatever kind of snuggle position you like that's still safe for the patient. That's saying, I respect it and let me help you.
Right.
Allow me to make your coupledom matter. You're more than a caregiver. You're still the spouse. And I say those words out loud and I teach hospices to say that. You're still a couple.
How validating that is.
Right.
Here's the current role that's brand new for you. But here's respect and acknowledgement of the person you have been for the last however many years inside your relationship with your partner.
Mm-hmm. Even if it's 2 years, if it's 2 years or 50 years, they're still partners, and they deserve to have that respected.
Yeah, you can't invalidate that based on the length of time.
Right.
Wow.
And then if it's like, well, we're older, I'm like, you know what? I'm older too. And I still fully intend to be sexually involved with my partner. So if you guys want to have any kind of intimacy, if you want to snuggle and take off that hospital gown and just be together skin to skin, I hope you will, because I want you to have that body memory after they're dead.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And as nurses, I know that there are devices and tubes and apparatus and drapes.
It takes teaching.
Yes, so let's think about that. This underpad crackles and it's unpleasant. So let's get you a fabric one. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the catheter and the placement of it and what we can do about your colostomy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because lots of times when people end up with those, it's in a medical emergency and they end up with a colostomy, there's a lot of things about colostomy care. There's nothing about intimacy in colostomies.
No. And yet they make decorative covers for them.
Right. Frilly and
so you
funny.
Can minimize. Yes.
Right. Poop. They have ones with little poop emojis on them. They have all the things.
Oh, how funny is that? But I think as hospice people, we forget that when we take care of people, body, mind, and spirit, mm-hmm. that we can't just carve out the pieces that make us uncomfortable.
Right.
Or take too much time. Now let's talk about that. Because it takes time to have these conversations.
It does.
And once you open it, man.
You can't close it right away unless they do.
And you need to be able to listen, right, unless they shut it down. Mm-hmm. But you need to be able to listen and then allow for follow-up questions in another visit. And we're not good about that. We have a tendency to say, okay, I did the teaching. It's a one and done. They should be good to go. But almost nothing in hospice works that way. The teaching we do has to be repeated.
And it needs to go back to IDT. It needs to go to IDT so that every member of the team knows what's going on and can contribute and can validate. I was in team meeting and I had a small discussion with your nurse, and I understand, as your chaplain, that she's really working with you to maintain your intimacy. What can I do to help with that? Would you guys like to, have a discussion together that I can help you with to talk about your relationship and what it's meant to you in all these years? Whoa, Nelly.
Oh, but look, life review, mm-hmm. validation of the relationship, mm-hmm. Talking about any guilt that mm-hmm. they might be experiencing, mm-hmm. any shame. And that's right up there. That is right in the chaplain's purview.
That's in their role.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm going to say that I think you're absolutely right that there's no reason that a chaplain can't come in and ask those questions that you started off with.
Right.
Okay, tell me how you guys met. Tell me who was the best kisser, who mm-hmm. Who was in love first, and
who pursued who.
Yeah, that led into their more intimate relationship. And I've known of a chaplain who worked with a couple in a facility and actually stood guard at their door for them.
I've done that too, as a matter of fact, as the social worker. Yeah. I mean, and we had a hospice volunteer once in Florida who made little pillows that we could put outside on the door that said, it's couple time.
Oh, it's like hanging the necktie on the doorknob when you're in college.
That's exactly right. Uh-huh.
Yeah, or a do not disturb sign.
Yeah,
right.
Basically.
We should have that.
What kind of audacious advocacy is that for a patient and their partner?
Right. And it says we count as a couple. Right?
I like that.
Yeah, it really does. So, all right. So you've got a hospice. We have some listeners out there who work in hospice who are going, I am never going to bring up this subject.
Yes, you are.
That would be me.
Yes, you are. Because it says to your couple that they count.
Yeah. Everything about them counts.
It's seeing them. Mm-hmm. And what a wonderful way to get us away from the clinicalization of death and dying.
Right.
Let's move away from that. Let's talk about who you are as a human being. When we acknowledge that part of their humanity, we move away from the mechanization of death, because we know that death is not a clinical event. Death is spiritual, psychosocial, relational, communal, all of those things. But to have the type of hospice care that every discipline understands, even the aides. So take it that far.
Oh, the aides are number one.
Yeah, they're the ones who are making the beds most of the time, putting the rails up or down or moving them and helping the patient with their intimate care. I would think that role would be crucial. So you've got to make sure if you're going to have that as part of the plan of care, being clean is part of being comfortable. So what if we said being intimate, physically intimate, whatever that looks like for you, is also part of being comfortable?
Right.
We talk about holding people's hands all the time.
Right.
Therapeutic massage. And that's just what we do as professionals and clinicians. But then if you take the physical intimacy in all its different forms, you have to acknowledge the sexual part of it as well.
Right. And when the aide is bathing someone, they can say, you know what? If the partner is standing there, you can do this too. You can do massage here. You're not going to hurt them. If you touch here, it's okay if while you are bathing, it becomes sexual. You guys are a couple. It's okay.
Right.
That's not my role, obviously, but it's okay. And I want to show you how to do this safely if this is something that you want. Right. And let's leave the patient feeling clean and fresh and respectable so that, or shaved or nails done or all the things that aides are exceptional. They're the ones who know our patients best. They hear them more than the rest of us because they spend more time with them.
Yes.
Right.
And they're the ones who initiate the tell me about your kids. Every aide I've ever known has known how couples have met, how many kids, how old they are, where the kids are, because they have that time. And it's how they fill the space while they're doing intimate body care.
Right.
To remove the intimate body care sensation. Right. So let's build on what that relationship that the aide has built. Right. And all of us can participate in that and share in that.
What kind of enriched hospice care would that be if we all did that?
What a change it would be immediately if everybody listening did this with one couple this week.
Yeah,
that's a challenge.
It would change that couple's dying process.
Yep,
Yeah.
There's a challenge for us. Well, who knew that at our age we would have the birds and bees talk?
But we have to, and it's part of life.
I'd rather talk about death than talk about this.
Most people would.
Yeah, and so here's the two most difficult topics to talk about: sex and death, and here we are. So.
Yep, that's all Jill. I'm showing up if we're going to talk about those.
It took us 6 years and over 400 podcasts to get to the point where we talk about this.
But what the research is, and this is why it's important for hospice, when a couple especially feels like their emotional and psychosocial, and including that, the intimacy and the psychosexual parts are included in the hospice care, not just let's fix the medical part. They are far more likely to depend on that hospice for grief support. If they feel shut down, if somebody walks in and they say, we've got this going on, we've got pain here, but I'm trying to figure out how to move my loved one so that, we can figure this out before we have to move to the hospital bed. If that gets shoved sideways and it's pain and nausea and symptom management, and then, okay, we'll get to the rest of it later, that family is not going to trust that hospice at end of life, and they're not going to accept any degree of grief support because they haven't felt heard.
Right.
And there's research that supports that in SCADs. And we know that it's true. So if we could instead say, we need to talk about that. I heard you, but yes, I'm going to make sure before we get done today that I've shown you how to do these things because I want you to be comfortable. I want you to feel safe, right? If it's a respiratory patient, it's how do you lay down next to your partner without feeling like you're suffocating them, right? Heart failure too. There's positioning things that have to happen with heart failure so that you don't lay on the wrong side because all of a sudden there's a crisis that you've created.
Right.
So let's talk about it, but you can do it in a funny way. Look, if you guys want to snuggle together, I want to teach you how not to kill her while you're snuggling. So we're going to do it this way instead, right?
Right.
It's possible.
Jill, you have really brought up some great topics here and given us some great information. This has been so good. And I really hope that our listeners take to heart what you have shared with us today, because the intimate side of a couple really needs to be explored, and they need to know that we care about every part of them, because as we've talked about already, that's what hospice does. Hospice is about every part of a patient's care and their life, body, mind, and spirit. And the sexual part touches all of those.
All of it. It enhances their well-being, and it gives the griever some really important memories for afterward.
It's a legacy. That might not be the best word to connect with it, but I think there's a legacy there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's important. I mean, even everybody listening, if you are partnered up, when you are in bed in the next couple days, snuggle up to your partner and memorize what that feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because those are important memories. And if you don't make it a really conscious habit to memorize those things, you won't have it to draw on in case there is an emergency. And that's important.
Absolutely. Jill, this has been wonderful. Thank you for sharing this time with us and sharing such an intimate topic with us.
Thank you for having me, and for both of you sticking with it.
I feel educated. It's very good. So, Jill, how can our listeners connect with you?
I have my websites, which is therebelliouswidow.com, which is affiliated with my book. But the book also has free on the website an entire downloadable caregiver book for how to, what things to remember to tell the doctor and what's going on and who to communicate with and all those sorts of things. So that's on there as well. It's free. You can make your own notebook. Because I'm a social worker after all. And then JillJohnsonYoung.com has the courses that I teach, but it also has a lot of resources on it that are absolutely free and downloadable. And there is stuff on there about intimacy at end of life, because that's important.
Perfect.
And then I'm on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and all the places, because it's what we do these days, right?
Absolutely. I'll have links in the show notes to all the sites in your social media so our listeners can connect with you, see the work that you're doing, and check out your resources.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jill, thanks again. This was so good, and we appreciate you and look forward to another chat some other time about another topic.
I sure hope so.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
So now, if you've listened to this whole episode, this whole interview, you probably understand, we hope that you understand the value of this conversation.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You can't section out a piece of someone's personhood and just pretend it's not there.
No, we really must tackle some of these hard subjects. I know that it's easy for us to go in and just cover the subjects that we're comfortable with. You know, just talk about the things that we need to talk about and that are the high level things, so to speak. But sometimes we've got to get into those subjects that are intimate with the patient, with the couple, and make sure that we talk about them in ways that are going to be helpful for them. And it doesn't have to be where we just come in and blurt it out and embarrass everybody.
Right.
Ease into it. Use those questions. And Jill gave us some really good ways to do that in a way that's dignified and respectful and honoring.
Gentle.
Yes.
A little bit of humor. I think such important conversations for us to have. And I will tell you that as a hospice nurse, when I was working in the field, I haven't done that for a while. I never had that conversation with anyone. And shame on me. Shame on me for not doing it. If you know better, you can do better.
Said Maya Angelou.
Absolutely. And 98% of the problems in this world are created by poor communication.
This is
true. And who said that?
I don't know where that statistic came from. Well, I know who said it. You just did.
I did. I say that all the time, though. That is a very pithy quote that I made up myself. But so it does go back to communication. And if you are a caregiver, if you are a patient, that doesn't define you completely. That's not all you are. That is one role. You might also be a homemaker. You might also be an employee, a parent, a grandparent, a friend, a colleague, a gardener, a painter, a musician. If you're a patient, that's not all who you are. That does not define your identity, nor does it limit it. We can talk about your abilities that you still have, the roles that you had, the people that you loved, the places that you've been. And sexual intimacy was part of your life, so let's not neglect those conversations.
Right.
Let's keep that conversation open, allowing for that patient. What if we, instead of asking only the questions for the things that we needed to know, we let the patient talk about just whatever they wanted to talk about?
Sure. Without shame.
Without a checklist.
Right. Without embarrassment.
Right.
They could just talk about whatever they wanted to talk about and be accepted non-judgmentally.
Right. Doesn't matter the relationship. LGBTQ, straight partners, a polyamorous relationship. People should feel comfortable enough to talk to their hospice professionals, their hospice team about these things. And then the type of care that they need, the interventions, right, should be incorporated into the plan of care. So the discussions in IDT, we would also caution the team to discuss that very respectfully and discreetly in respectful terms during the IDT meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even go as far as to say this is not a subject that is out of the realm of possibility for chaplains to discuss.
Absolutely. And you guys talked about this.
We did. And so hopefully you've listened to the conversation. You know what we said about that. But it's not impossible or it's not inappropriate for a chaplain to discuss these things with a couple and learn how he or she can help in that way.
So if you're talking about comfort, communication should be comfortable as well.
Yes.
Which means if you have a male chaplain and a female patient, and that female patient isn't willing to talk to a male chaplain about intimate subjects in the patient's life, then you find a female chaplain if you can,
right.
Or give it to another team member who's female if that's what the patient needs to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this has been really good for us to bring up this topic. It's not something that we've talked about before on the podcast.
And I have to say, I learned a lot from Jill and the guidance she was offering.
Yes, very much so. And so our thanks to Jill for being so fearless and being so open and honest and sharing her teaching and her experience. So here's one thing that we would encourage you to do. If you would like for Jill to speak and teach about this subject at your hospice, by all means, get in touch with her. You can go to the website that we're going to put in the show notes. You can contact her through that website. Let her know that you're interested in having her either through a Zoom meeting or even through a live meeting come and talk to your team about this very subject. Or honestly, she's willing to talk about any subject that you would like for her to talk about, but we would encourage you to get in touch with her. So you can go to her websites and check it out and contact her through them. It's
JillJohnsonYoung.com. We'll have a link in the show notes, like Jerry said, but you can always find her there at JillJohnsonYoung.com. Grief Talker. You can connect with her resources, her trainings, any appearances that she's got, the podcast that she's done, and her blogs that she writes.
Thanks for listening to The Heart of Hospice. I'm Jerry Finter here with Helen Bauer. Because we know your hospice journey is 24/7, you can always find us at theheartofhospice.com. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
To connect with us, just send an email to host@theheartofhospice.com. You can also find us on social media. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.